Welcome to Module 2, Lesson 1, Officers and Directors. In the first module, we worked on the foundation of your organization, the mission, vision, and values. Module 2 is all about the people and the positions you will need to fill to apply for tax exemption and to run a successful organization. We know that all companies, for-profit and nonprofit, depend on people. Without people, we don't have an organization. We have what's called a sole proprietorship. This module is about building your dream team. You may be the only person in your organization right now, and that's okay. This lesson's going to help you a lot. Or you may have an established team, and I'm confident you will pick up some valuable tips. In this lesson, I'll discuss officers and directors. We'll look at some of the other key people and the components of any successful nonprofit organization. Before we dive in, let's look at some of the big picture challenges nonprofits are facing right now. My experience working with hundreds of for-profits and nonprofit companies has led me to this conclusion. The biggest challenge that all companies face is the lack of a strategic plan. You must have a written plan for your organization. The IRS application process will help you get clear on many of the important components of a strategic plan, and we're going to be covering those in detail. For this lesson, know that the more time you put into the fundamentals, the more likely it is that your organization will be successful. And I want to congratulate you for being here and for taking action. Most nonprofits struggle with money issues, fundraising and budgeting. And then there's always the looming issue of legislative or government changes. Nonprofits are at the mercy of Congress and our state and local governments, who are looking more and more at tax-exempt organizations as a potential revenue source. Clearly, a successful organization depends on attracting and retaining people. And not just any people, but quality people who are in alignment with your organization's mission, vision, and values. And since we're talking about people, I believe many people and organizations are just feeling overwhelmed right now by the rapid changes in technology and by using social media effectively, which are a must for any nonprofit's long-term success plan. We're going to cover how to use social media in a future module, which leads to the next challenge, increasing public awareness. How do we get our message heard by the people who will take action? There are so many competing agendas: government, other nonprofits and NGOs, and for-profit companies with social good messages. How can we deal with all of these challenges and attract and retain quality people? Well, let's look at the challenges for building your board of directors and attracting people to your organization or cause. I don't need to tell anyone what difficult times people have been dealing with, as many of you work with some of the most affected people. Addictions, the problems with the educational system, crimes, wars, natural disasters, to name a few. And as a society, we're disconnected. With all of these distractions, it's more difficult than ever to get people to give more, volunteer, or participate. A tough economy, high unemployment, and the lack of support systems for the poor, elderly, and the uninsured are just a few of the difficult situations that many families face. And many people are just stretched to the limit, and they don't have the time or financial resources. And almost any time we turn on the television, we're reminded of everything that's going wrong in the world, with much less attention to what's going right. Other challenges include our polarized political parties and the ideology that puts people against each other. You're either on one side or the other. Confidence in Congress is at an all-time low. Technology overwhelms. There's challenges to the environment, scarcity of natural resources, which leads to more global competition and posturing. Whew! With all of the challenges facing the world right now, I have to commend all of you for making a difference and taking action to make the world a better place. These are the challenges for building boards. Now let's look at the people and positions needed to create a successful organization. Think of your nonprofit as a big league sports franchise. In every professional team sport, there's that founder, the visionary, the president of the organization. And in your nonprofit, That person is you. Next, using the sports analogy, you have those front office personnel, the executives who provide the oversight and direction. In your organization, this would be your board of directors. Then there's the head coach, and on your team, that could be a program or fundraising director. And then you have your coaches. They're like your advisors, just like the nonprofit advisor group, your accountant, your legal, and compliance. The sports team would also have its assistant coaches, which in your organization, that could be your operations people, IT, and HR departments. A sports team is trainers, and in the nonprofit world, the trainers are the mentors, educators, and counselors. And perhaps you have a facilities manager for your team and for your building. Now, a sports team wouldn't be complete without the players, and in your organization, the players are your employees and staff. An athletic team might have cheerleaders. Your organization would have a media spokesperson, social media manager. And those of you who have had children in sports, you know who the moms and dads are. In your nonprofit, they're your volunteers. Now, if you're feeling a little overwhelmed because you're the whole team, don't worry. We're going to cover how to find those people and build your organization. But wait, there are a few external people that our organization also has to deal with. First, we have the federal government, specifically Congress, who writes tax legislation, and the IRS, who's there to enforce the laws and make sure that people comply. Then you have your state government. Usually your non-profit corporation falls under the Secretary of State and your state attorney general's office, which in most states oversees fundraising activities. Your local county and city is probably involved with issuing licenses, permits, and describing more fundraising rules. And then you have other organizations, corporate sponsors, and other nonprofits. And of course, there's the media, and particularly the internet, that must be monitored and managed. And finally, any other corporate entities that you might be doing business with, like banks and landlords. So the bottom line is this: don't do this alone. Don't carry the weight of your entire agenda on your shoulders. Don't be overwhelmed, too busy, no team, or doing everything. You're committed to your mission. Now you just have to find some other like-minded people to help you with your cause. So let's start by building your board of directors. Let's look at the 4 criteria to help you build a dynamic board of directors. In the next few minutes, we will discuss these 4 in detail. These are identifying the roles and responsibilities, setting the expectations, building systems for accountability and metrics, and most importantly, identifying the needs of the organization. The first step in building a board is to identify the needs for your organization. And depending on your experience, background, and education, these could be raising funds, people skills, implementing programs, creating budgets, administrative help or assistance, operational business activities, community awareness, and of course your legal, accounting, and tax compliance. Let's look at 4 considerations when choosing board members. How important these are to you will depend on the needs of your organization. You'll look at specific sectors first. Sectors like technology, legal, health, tax, education, banking, nonprofit, or perhaps even government. What are the demographics? The age, the gender, the race, and the residence. Where do people live? Specific skills in law, accounting, investment management, human resources, government relations, communications, information technology, fundraising, and social media. And other factors, things like experiences, personal wealth, their network, who they're connected to, and perhaps licenses and education. Now let's look at 4 other considerations that are in the category of people skills and personality traits. Are they good with people? Are they a team player? They have communication skills. How do they communicate with others? Do they have a background in psychology or human behavior? After all, they're going to be working with other people. And do they have a high level of ambition and motivation? How motivated are they? Now, you have to set the expectations. So what are these expectations? Do they have a willingness to take on a leadership role in the organization? How many hours of service are they willing to donate per week or per month? Do they have special skills that can equate to completing tasks or projects that can be assigned? And are they good at fundraising? Can they personally donate? Are they connected to a network or people of influence? And often we minimize the importance of your board members being good fundraisers and potentially even being donors themselves. As an example, if you wanted to serve on a large board, let's say PBS, Public Broadcasting, it's mandatory that you contribute in order to be on that board. In other words, you're actually buying your place on the board by being an active contributor. So this is an important piece that very often we tend to minimize or not think about as new organizations. But can your potential board members be people that can financially support the organization as well? Now, why do people serve on boards? In order to build an effective board, we need to understand why people would serve on a board in the first place. Now, it could be they have a personal involvement with the cause. Perhaps they have firsthand experienced something like cancer, and your organization is a cancer organization, or maybe they've had to go through that with a family member. So they've had a very personal involvement. Perhaps they're just somebody that wants to change the world and make a difference. People that are looking for significance, meaning, and contribution and giving back. It could be that they want to be part of a club or a group that they respect. In the example of PBS, Public Broadcasting, perhaps they enjoyed public broadcasting, they like the shows, it's a really cool organization, and they want to be part of that. Or it may be that they just want to leave a legacy. We know the stories of Bill and Melinda Gates and Warren Buffett, and many of the world's richest people have created foundations to not only help people and causes, but to also create a lasting legacy. And that's important to some people. So knowing what those motivations are will help you attract the right people for your organization. We suggest you establish best practices and begin with alignment. Now, you may have heard that from Module 1. We spent a lot of time on mission, vision, and values. Does everyone on the team share the same mission, vision, and values? And one way to find out and to establish a best practice is to develop a questionnaire. So potential board members or officers would complete that, and you would find out, are they in alignment? And how important is that to both your organization and also to them? Communication. How does the team communicate? Are they informed? What systems and processes can be used to improve the communication situation? And is there a mechanism for feedback in both directions? In other words, not just feedback from you as the president or the visionary down, but also feedback from the rank and file up, so that you're receiving feedback from members of the team, your volunteers, other employees, so on. And the accountability and metrics. Does each team member know exactly, specifically, and precisely their roles and responsibilities? Create feedback loops. Feedback loop looks like this. There's an action that occurs. So what's the action that your board is taking? And what are those desired outcomes? Then you're going to measure. So you take the action, then you measure based on established standards to find out how well or not you're doing. And then modify based on those measured results, modify the actions to increase effectiveness. So the feedback loop is simply action, measure, modify. Creating that feedback loop is so important. All right, let's change gears here a little bit and get into the details of officers and directors. If you need a break, this is a good time to stop the video, get caught up on your notes, and when you're ready to continue, we will move on and deep dive into officers and directors. I'll see you in a minute. Okay, let's take a few minutes and discuss the roles and responsibilities for officers and directors. Directors are the governing body of the organization. They provide oversight and direction to the officers. That's where that term board of directors comes from. That's the governing body. The officers provide the day-to-day leadership and decision-making for the organization. Now, directors comprise the board of directors, and the minimum recommended number is 3. We're going to talk more about board of directors in a minute. The officers there's 4 positions: the president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. In small organizations, the same people could be both the directors and the officers. And in fact, this is quite common and is expected. Many of you that are in the academy may be playing both roles right now, both the role of some of the directors and the role of some of the officers. And that's normal and expected. The IRS knows that all large organizations started out as small organizations. And so there were people wearing different hats, if you will, in that organization and multiple positions. Now, when we get to larger organizations, the directors, those people are different than the officers. And they may come from the community. They could be leaders from the community, business leaders, people from the clergy, public officials, all different types of people with all different types of backgrounds serving as directors. In large organizations, the officers typically will be full-time compensated employees of the organization. So in this case, in large organizations, there are 2 different people. The directors and officers must work together very closely to achieve those common goals and objectives. Again, directors provide the oversight of the officers. If you have employees, they're going to be accountable to their line management or their chain of command, and ultimately to those officers. And of course, the officers are going to be accountable to the board of directors. They're going to actually answer to the board. So let's look at a little bit more detail about directors. Some states require a minimum number of directors. So make sure that you check with your state and find out. Some states only require 1 director, or they require a founding director or an incorporating director, or what might be called an organizational director, and then you're required to add additional directors later. A director may need to sign contracts or agreements, and this is very important. And as you go through this process of attracting directors and officers, one of the things that you need to be clear on and create those best practices, what are some of the, again, roles and responsibilities that a director may have? One could be signing contracts, and some people may not be comfortable with that or may not want to do that. So make sure that you are clear so that when you're approaching someone about serving on a board, they know what the expectations are up front. Directors must be of legal age, and that depends on state law as well. Now, the IRS does not have a minimum requirement. However, you should have at least 3 directors when applying for tax-exempt status. Now, over the years, we've seen organizations approved with 1 director, and I will tell you, nowadays, that is a rarity. One of the things that the IRS focuses on are the number of directors and some of the other criteria that we're going to talk about here in just a second. So know that in the beginning of your organization and starting out, you may only have 1 director or a couple, but when we get to that application process, which we're going to go into great detail in Module 4, you will need to have 3 directors, and those directors are going to be providing their personal information as well. So making sure that you start lining those folks up right now instead of later will be a great help to you. An organization's directors are public information. That means that their name and the address that they provide will be disclosed on public record. So again, informing your directors, hey, their name's going to be out there. And for a lot of folks, that's a good thing. They want to be associated with great organizations doing wonderful things. Now, the selection process, terms of appointment, term limits, and the removal of directors are described in the organization's bylaws. And bylaws are like the constitution of your organization. They're the governing document. We don't provide bylaws because in many states, it's required that the bylaws are written by a licensed attorney. And so we are not licensed to practice law. We can't provide those. As a director of your organization, you are certainly welcome to go out and find bylaws. There's standard or what they call boilerplate bylaws, things you can find online, or you can ask organizations that are similar to yours if they would share their bylaws with you. And then you, as one of the principals, can modify those bylaws. We would suggest that once they're in their near completed form, that you have an attorney in your state where you're operating just review those and make sure they comply with the state law. But these processes related to the directors and officers are going to be described in those bylaws. So it's very important because, again, this will talk about selection process and terms of appointments and how do you put people on the board, how do you remove them, and so on. Your voting, consent, quorum rules, they're all going to be described in those bylaws as well. Directors have a legal duty to act in the best interest of the organization. And state statutes, which are just the laws of the individual states, describe this as what's called the duty of care. In other words, they must put the organization ahead of their own interests or the interests of, let's say, the board, and act in the interest of the organization and what is the best interest of that organization. Generally, directors are indemnified from personal liability. And what indemnified means is that they can't be held personally liable for something that goes sideways with the organization. If something were to occur where the organization was going to be sued, indemnification means that the directors as individual persons could not be sued. Now, this depends on state law, case law, and also whether or not you've been following your corporate formalities as to whether or not that will be upheld. And again, this is a matter of law, so if you're not clear, talk to an attorney in your state to find out how far the indemnification extends to you in your state. Okay, this is a state law legal issue, but generally speaking, directors are indemnified from personal liability. And directors must avoid conflict of interest and self-dealing. And must avoid is not a strong enough term. They absolutely cannot be involved in situations of conflict of interest or self-dealing. Conflict of interest and self-dealing just simply means that there's some underlying profit motive, some personal financial benefit that they're going to receive by being part of this organization. And know that this is a major area of focus for the IRS when we move down the process. And again, actually in Module 3, we're going to talk specifically about the conflict of interest statement that's required in your documents. We're going to share that with you line by line, word by word. Know that this is an area of great interest of the service. They're going to look at this, and you must avoid all conflicts of interest. What the IRS is looking for are nonprofits, or rather, they're looking for for-profit businesses that are being masked or concealed as nonprofits to somehow avoid paying income taxes. And certainly, we would not recommend you do that. We don't endorse that. We don't want any part of that. So making sure that your nonprofit is truly a nonprofit organization and not some for-profit that's just simply trying to get tax-exempt status. There's a lot of disclosure around conflict of interest and self-dealing, so be aware of that. Also, when you're looking at potential board members and potential officers, see if you can flush out if there are any conflicts of interest. I mean, why do they want to serve on your board? And making sure that you avoid any potential controversies up front will save you a lot of headaches down the road. Now, the selection of directors. Some criteria that you want to look at. Again, are they committed, passionate about the mission? It's very important. Do you have and share an alignment of values? Do they share the same vision? Where have we heard mission, vision, and values before? Now you know why we spent so much time covering it in Module 1. It's so important. These are the filters that you're going to use to find out, is this person a good fit for your board? Diverse. Ideally, your board of directors should consist of people with different educational, employment, and cultural backgrounds. So diversity is a great thing when you have your board of directors. At the same time, the IRS is going to look for a board that's representative of the community you serve or the agenda or purpose of your organization. And so this may sound a little contradictory. On one hand, we're saying, well, have a diverse board. On the other hand, we're saying the IRS is looking for a board that's representative of the community you serve or that agenda or purpose. So let me explain this in a little bit more detail. Some of the organizations that we've worked with over the years have a very specific agenda or purpose. And some of these organizations are related to things like scientific research, medical research, very narrow areas of focus. So in that case, a board that's representative of that community would be, if it's a medical research organization, it might be made up of physicians, it might be made up of people that have advanced degrees and things related to medical research. So that would be the agenda or purpose that those organizations are serving. We recently completed one that was a group of economists and a couple of Nobel Prize winning economists. And so that board, and it's based on the organization's very high level study of economics, well, that board is made up of people that are very high level academics in the arena of economics. On the other hand, you might have an organization that is helping a specific community or a geographic area, and so that board could be more diverse, and it might be made up of people representative of the community you serve, but also people of different educational, employment, and cultural backgrounds. So selecting your board and putting that together, use these criteria. When possible, your board should consist of non-related parties, although related parties are very common in small organizations and startup organizations. So who are related parties? Well, related parties are described by the IRS as two different groups. One group are family members. So again, very common in a new organization to have people that are of the same family, brother, sister, mother, daughter, married couples, brother-in-law, sister-in-law. Those are related parties based on marriage or blood, right? So those are related parties, and that information will be disclosed. The other type of related party that is disclosed when we get to the IRS application are people that have a business relationship. So we might have two board members and they are both partners in a for-profit company, and that's not necessarily something that will disqualify these folks to be on a board, but it will be disclosed and it will be fully explained, and the IRS may ask additional qualifying questions. So as you build out your board and as you grow your organization, and remember, all of these huge organizations started small, start thinking and looking in terms of non-related parties, bringing other people, other diversity, other people that represent your community into your board. It's just a good practice. Will help you grow your organization. Okay, let's look at the officers. Most people are familiar with the four positions here that we have. The vice president, of course, is in support of the president when the president is not available to make decisions on behalf of the organization. The secretary is in support of the president, and the secretary has that role of the record keeper, starting off and recording things like the meeting minutes and some of the formalities that are very important. Again, as you start off, you want to make sure that you're taking care of these things up front, these corporate formalities. And so the secretary is really the person that has the accountability to be taking care of those items. The treasurer, taking care of the money, the banking. They might have a CFO background or financial background, accounting background. Some states require or consider what's called the first director as one of the officers. So depending on the state where you're organized, you might list on a formal list of officers a position called first director. So it just depends on your state. And of course, we have the position of the president, who is the day-to-day leader of the organization. So some of the criteria of the officers that you should know: most states require a nonprofit corporation to have a president, secretary, and treasurer. And some states, the vice president position is optional, or it's optional and non-recorded. So even if you have one, it's just that position is not recorded. One of the most common questions we get is, can one person be multiple officer positions? The answer is yes, although check with your state law, because some states might have a restriction of a person that is, more than one or more than two positions. So make sure and verify that. Officers and duties are described in the bylaws. We talked about the bylaws under directors. Again, duties and responsibilities, and particularly the election and replacement of the officers, those kinds of formalities will be described in those bylaws, and you adopt those by vote, and then those become kind of the constitution, if you will, of the organization. Again, generally, officers are indemnified from personal liability, so they can't be sued personally for the actions of the organization, but check on your state law. It's based on state law, case law, and some other variables as well. And clearly, if the officers or directors are in a situation of committing fraud or a really blatant malfeasance, then that indemnification doesn't always apply. So they can still be held personally liable, and both civilly and in some cases criminally. So make sure that you do a little research on that and stay within your state law requirements. Officers can receive reasonable compensation for services. And in Module 5, we're going to spend a pretty fair amount of time on compensation and what that means. People ask all the time, if I'm the officer or the president of this organization, can I be paid? The answer is absolutely, you can be paid. Large nonprofits pay people. In some cases, they get paid very well. So there's nothing inherently wrong about receiving compensation. It must be reasonable, and it must be for services that you provide to that organization. So again, we're going to cover compensation in Module 5. Best practice, and this is very important. Board of Directors should implement a decision matrix to guide the officers in the conduct of the organization. We're going to show you an example of a decision matrix right here. All the decision matrix is, if you think of it like a spreadsheet, is a list of written rules, criteria that must be met in order to have an action occur. So for instance, if the organization is going to spend more than X number of dollars, that amount must be approved by the Board of Directors. And then in your bylaws, that would be described even further as to what constitutes approval. Is it a unanimous vote? Is it a majority vote? What if all the board isn't available to vote? So you'll have your conditions in those bylaws. But let's say it's an expenditure over $500. It has to be approved by the board, or $5,000, or whatever that number is. But you're going to create that. So there's different levels of capability to make decisions. Contracts over X must be approved by the board. So again, if you're going to, your organization is going to sign into a long-term lease, that must be approved by the board. But minor expenditures don't have to be approved by the board. And that's kind of the point here. If you need to pay the power bill, you don't need to get an approval of the Board of Directors, right? As long as that's described out in your decision matrix. Very helpful tool. Now, expenditures between X and Y require the approval of the president and the treasurer. So these are things on the day-to-day basis. Do you need everyone or your entire board to approve it? No. Maybe there's a criteria between $50 and $1,000. Just the president and the treasurer have to get together and approve that. Checks over a certain amount must be signed by 2 officers. Very important. If you read the newspaper or the internet, you'll see, unfortunately, cases of people embezzling money from nonprofits, and typically those types of things occur because only one person had signatory authority and no one else there was no other oversight. And so, people start taking small amounts of money, and they get into large amounts of money, and they eventually get caught and go to prison. So one way to avoid those potential problems is, hey, if it's a $10 or $20 check, treasurer can sign them or the president can sign them individually. But if it's over a certain amount, then it requires 2 signatures on that check. It's just a perfect way to maintain that. In an emergency, and you describe some of these contingencies or emergencies, the president or the secretary or the treasurer has the power to spend, borrow, or loan up to X number of dollars. I'll give you an example. We had a nonprofit, an animal organization, animal rescue organization, and in order to meet payroll, they used funds that were donated specifically for the purpose of expanding the facility. And so, you know, these funds were not, the donor put conditions on the donation that said these funds are only to be used to expand the shelter, not to be used for operating expenses or salaries or whatever those conditions were. Well, in this case, the president acted on their own accord and used some of those earmarked funds to pay the payroll. Well, the board, and it was fully disclosed, the board caught wind, and there was a dissension among the board. Clearly, the payroll had to be met, or they wouldn't have had an organization. But at the same time, there was no approval process, and nothing was tabled to say, hey, we're in an emergency situation. We've got to make payroll. We're going to take a temporary loan from this fund and then go ahead and pay that. It opened up a whole can of worms. It could have been something that potentially was a violation of state law, and could have upset a major donor who then wants their money back. You'll see these cases happen with large nonprofits. In fact, there was one recently, somebody was taking back a $15 million donation because it was to a museum and there were certain conditions and the museum was using the money for something else. And imagine the amount of problems it creates. So having a clear idea of this, what are these contingencies and then how are they handled and who has to approve them, very intelligent decision to create this matrix and get it done up front. Can't emphasize that enough. This is a huge tool, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit business. And best practices for hiring, firing, choosing professionals you're going to work with, outsourcing, partnering up with other nonprofits. I mean, what are the best practices? Do you have a peer review for a hire before somebody's terminated? Who's going to sit in on that? We know that wrongful termination lawsuits and things happen all the time. So how are we going to protect the organization and ourselves by creating some best practices, and who is authorized and accountable for making those decisions? Decision matrix. So it avoids controversy by establishing rules of conduct. It must be in writing. It's one of the funniest things we always hear when controversy comes up. Well, we had a policy, but it wasn't in writing. Okay, well, it must be ratified by the board. So if you're going to have a decision matrix, it's obviously some very important items in there. Make sure that your board gets together and approves it and says, yep, we agree with this. This is going to be the law of the land. Record that in the meeting minutes and then distribute that decision matrix to the related parties, the people that need to know, here's how it's going to work. If you don't do these 4 steps, you really don't have a decision matrix. You have an informal set of rules that eventually will be broken, and then you're back into that situation of controversy. So you want to avoid that. Another thing that we would like you to do, very important that you do this, is create an organization chart. So create a present and future organization chart. These are the functions and the people responsible. When we do this in the workshops, sometimes we have people, and it's kind of funny, they sit there, they have one box and say, well, where's your chart? That's it, I'm everything. Okay, we understand, that's very common. That's okay. But start building that organizational chart out. In particular, what does it look like in the future? I mean, if you're the Lone Ranger right now and the sole person in this organization, you have to build out that chart. So we'll understand what it looks like today. What is it going to look like in the future? What are those key positions that we talked about earlier in this lesson? And some of those criteria for selecting those, and who are the people that you need to accomplish your mission? Every nonprofit's a little bit different. Some are providing direct assistance, some are providing scientific research, some are dispersing education and information. So your nonprofit could be different, could be very hands-on, it could be information-based, it could be online-based, but you're going to have an organization chart based on what you do, and then those functions, and then the people responsible. Now, the role of the president and your small select management team is to define those boxes and how that work is to be done. So again, procedures, responsibilities, your standards, and what are the outcomes that are expected for each of those positions on that organization chart. The more detail and work you can provide, the better you're going to be. Now, the IRS, when you submit your application, they're not going to ask for an organizational chart. However, if you have one and you've got great descriptive criteria in there, and you have a decision matrix, again, for your organization, do you think these might be helpful items for the IRS to look at and say, this is a well thought out organization. This is something that we might consider fast track approving, right? The more you do up front, the less work you're going to have to do in the back end, the faster you'll be approved. Be sure to delegate and hold people accountable. And please don't do everything yourself. This is a team sport. It's a team effort. In order to accomplish your mission and reach more people and do the important work that you're doing, you can't do it alone. So adopt a mindset of how do you attract quality people, delegate and hold them accountable, and grow your organization. Leadership succession is very important as well. A lot of times when we have a brand new organization, we're not thinking about what happens when people leave, but it's very important to start identifying now, at least 1 and preferably 2 years in advance, who are the people that are going to carry the flag when you're no longer available or around. That could mean in the position of the president, could also importantly mean that group of the board. My wife and I were on a board group. There was no succession plan. And as people came up on term limits, in other words, by the bylaws, they were limited from staying on board by the bylaws, the constitution of the organization. So as people were having to leave, not voluntarily, but they were restricted from being on the board again, there were no replacements. And think about this. Organizations have been operating for, in this case, 50 years, didn't have board members because they hadn't identified people in advance. So recruit board members as potential leaders. Some of the folks that get involved in your organization may be involved in a part-time type of role, or use the term dabbling in your organization a little bit. They want to find out more that it's about. But you may find that they have tremendous leadership skills, and the organization and them are in alignment in their values, and that they continue to scale up their participation, and maybe one day they become the leader of the organization, the succession plan. Develop written criteria to analyze and select board and officer candidates. Hint, we have covered these. The needs of the organization and your mission, vision, and values. So none of this is new information, but I think the key part here is make sure that that is written. Develop as much of this stuff as you can up front. It will serve you very well in the future. And don't select people based only on proximity or availability. So true in organizations and in life. Many decisions that are made are just based because you sit next to that person at work or on the bus every day or whatever that looks like. Or you take somebody and say, well, Joe would be a good board member because he's just unemployed, sitting at home right now doing nothing. Well, that's not a criteria for picking your board members or your officers. But unfortunately, a lot of times we do that. We pick the person that happens to be just available. They're not going to be the strongest members you have. And so being selective up front, again, alignment of values in particular, we talked about that in Module 1, Lesson 3, will serve you very well. Create a movement and an organization that people want to join. And think about this from the context of the vision of your organization. The vision should be to create an organization where you have literally a waiting list of people that want to serve on your board. You have more volunteers than you can use. You don't know where to put the folks. You've got so many people wanting to volunteer and sign up. That is a powerful and lasting organization. So create that movement and be the organization that people want to be part of, and you will never have to seek them. They're going to find you. So this has been a long lesson, a lot of information in this lesson, and I think there's a lot of lessons, but you have to do your work. So number one, write your organization's best practices and begin with the needs of your organization. Start there. As you project into the future, the first 90 days, the first 6 months, the first year, what does it look like? What are you going to need? And how do you develop and create some best practices around those needs so you can begin to fill the spots? In this context of this lesson, we were talking about people. So start with your people needs. Who are some of the people and positions and experience levels that can really help propel this organization? You'll be doing a tremendous favor to them and to the people you serve, and also to yourself. So do that. Begin with those needs. Identify those key people and those key positions and go to them and reach out to them and extend that hand and say, you are the kind of person I think that would be very well suited to serve on our board, and here's what we're doing. And you'd be amazed. People were like very flattered when you approach them with something like your organization. Create a decision matrix. Start at a basic level. Start with the financial decisions and who needs to be part of and how much buy-in do you need to have from a board or multiple officers or whatever that looks like. And then extend it out into things like hiring and termination and any decisions that are going to be made. Be sure to put that in writing and then create that organizational chart, not just now, but what does it look like in the future? And remember, we talked about vision. That vision, the future, is what's going to propel you when you hit some bumps in the road and some hard times. So having that organizational chart and saying, this one day is going to be a big thing. We're going to help a lot of people. If that's your goal, start with that chart and start filling in those spots. All right. Finally, let us know how you're doing. You can email us at review@nonprofitadvisor.org. If you have any of the assignments you're completing in this organization you're struggling with, just send us an email. Let us know. We'll give you some feedback and some assistance. We want you to be successful in your endeavors. That's why we're here. You're your partner in your success. Celebrate the wins. A successful organization is a team sport. So go out there and build your team. And when you're ready to log back in, we're going to have lesson 2 for you. So take care. Thank you for being here today. We'll talk to you soon.